All right, so everybody listening, we have a returning guest, the man, the myth, the legend, the former governor and former U.S. Senator from Virginia, Senator George Allen. He is a legend on the program, been on quite a few times. We always love having him on because he brings a lot of great information to the program. Governor, thanks so much for always coming on the program and really bringing the great information to the viewers and the listeners.
Thank you, fire breathing Rob. Good to be with you on Ronald Reagan's. It would be his
Right.
114th birthday. I'm wearing my Ronald Reagan Ranch vest for this appearance with you.
I'll tell you, there's a lot of comparisons, and I want you to even just dive deep into this due to the former president's birthday today about his comparisons with President Trump. Obviously, we both know that they're both TV guys, actors, movies, television in general. What other comparisons do you see from the former president, Ronald Reagan, to our president right now, Donald J. Trump?
I think for the most part, on policies, there's a lot of symmetry between them. Personalities are completely different.
Right.
Ronald Reagan came from the Midwest. He has that small town, Midwest, heartland, humility. He's known as a Westerner and from his acting and all. And in fact, at Reagan Ranch, I'm chair of the Reagan Ranch Board of Governors now. Reagan Ranch Presidential Scholar. We're preserving his ranch, where he signed the biggest tax cut in history in 1986. And we also acquired his boyhood home in Dixon, Illinois. And when you think of the 1986 tax cut, President Trump's 2017 tax cuts were very similar. They were the first time since 1986 where Reagan at the Reagan Ranch actually signed that big tax cut, tax reform. The results from both of Reagan's tax cuts and Trump's tax cuts were increased investment in the United States. The United States was made more competitive. There were more jobs created, and the pay of workers went up. And so they both trust free people and free enterprise in that regard. Both President Reagan and President Trump don't like a government with excessive regulations, and both of them have worked to reduce the impact of government on free enterprise and investment. Both of them tried to, Reagan had the Grace Commission trying to find waste and duplication and regulatory reform when he was president, and President Trump in his second term, well, he tried to do it somewhat in his first term, but this time it's much more of focus with this Musk Commission or Doge Commission, which I think can have really the most monumental, lasting impact on the federal government. So those things are similar. They both wanted to unleash American energy resources. Reagan did it, not just American energy resources, but he wanted the Saudis to secretly, as it turned out, secretly increase production to drop the world prices of oil, which in effect bankrupted the Soviet Union, because Russia's or the Soviet Union's main source of revenues are oil and gas revenues. And if the prices dropped, the Soviet Union's credit rating dropped, and they couldn't fund the expansion and strengthening of their military. President Trump, in a different way, in fact, he just recently was asking the Saudis and others to increase oil production to reduce revenues to the theocracy in Iran as well as Russia in it. And so they both understood the importance of energy for not just our economy and people, but on an international stage on how that affects our allies and diminishes the revenues to our enemies. President Trump always brings up peace through strength. Everyone knows that was Ronald Reagan's quote, and President Trump brings that up as well. Now, again, the personalities are different. Yeah. Being from a small town in the Midwest versus a New York City real estate developer and promoter and so forth. Those are big differences in their personalities, but their policies are fairly similar. There are some differences that I see, if you want me to get into it, there's some differences. I don't think there'd be any question that Ronald Reagan would be backing Ukraine and fighting for their sovereignty. Ronald Reagan, in fact, I have a quote here from Reagan on supplying weapons to people in countries fighting against the Soviets or Russian invasions. And I quote, "There's nothing wrong with giving free people weapons to defend their freedom."
Mm.
He said that. It's on page 258 in a book called The Crusader. And so Reagan saw the importance of allies in defeating the Soviet Union. Margaret Thatcher and Great Britain were very important. Pope John Paul gave a moral aspect to it. Helmut Kohl of Germany was also important. So allies to project our strength and have effective sanctions and unity against those who are aggressive autocrats, it is important to have allies. And I think Reagan valued them a great deal.
I want to kind of go deep into this since, you were an elected official, obviously, as a governor and also a U.S. Senator. And in a time with obviously President Bush was president of the United States, different, obviously, kind of president than President Trump. The Republican Party, it's kind of switched almost to like that Teddy, and you can disagree with me, Governor, if you don't feel this is correct. But I feel like the Republican Party has switched to more of a business-friendly party, which obviously they still are business-friendly, but it's more of a populist, Teddy Roosevelt, obviously Donald Trump bringing his own spin to this as well. Can you talk about that change? Because it was different in the 80s under Reagan than it is now under Trump. Again, there are the similarities, as you stated, but there are some differences with this populist mantle that he's really took.
Yeah, all parties evolve. The Democratic Party is not the same party it was even in the days of Bill Clinton or JFK. Those of us who are Republicans wish you long for the days of Bill Clinton and balanced budget and going along ultimately with welfare reform and so forth. So both parties have evolved. The thing that's similar is they talked about Reagan Democrats, and he would get a lot of those blue collar workers who just thought, these are just common sense ideas. He's going to stand strong with our country. And Trump, in his own way, has also appealed to the so-called working class. The Republicans, both parties are broad and diverse parties. Let's say that. Both parties do get pulled to the extremes. The Democrats have gotten pulled to the extremes of the socialistic, I call them regressives. They call it progressive. Their ideas are regressive, increasing the price of gasoline and the price of electricity by hundreds, if not thousands of dollars a year. Same with groceries and so forth. These don't hurt the wealthy elites who fly in their private jets to some UN climate conference in Paris or Cancun. It hurts working families, especially lower and middle income working families. So as Carville said, it's the economy stupid, but those sort of things people remembered. And in fact, again, one of the things in the last campaign is it was Ronald Reagan's quote, "Do you feel better now? Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago?" So people remembered what it was like before the pandemic under Trump policies versus the 4 years of Biden policies. And most people who are working, they're saying, I was better off then. I was getting more. Things didn't cost as much.
Did you expect Biden to be that horrendous? Obviously, you didn't agree with this
policy, Rob.
But you were a senator with him at the same time. You knew this man, I'm sure. Yeah. Whether you were good friends or not, that's besides the point. You knew where he stood, and you met with him many times, of course.
Sure.
But he was just totally horrendous.
Yes, and it was a disappointment. I've served on the Foreign Relations Committee with Joe Biden. His office was just down the hall from mine in the Russell Building. And Joe was verbose. A lot of politicians are, I guess. But but he was kind of a left of center senator, and he would work with Republicans. There'd be a lot of times you disagree, but he was more of a centrist, left of center again. But as president, the disappointment is he seemed to be just a puppet of the far left. Yeah. And whoever was making his decisions or advising him or giving him the parameters of where to make a decision. It was just all far left and really so much different than the way he was as a U.S. senator. And he's obviously all of us. If you keep living, you keep declining a little bit. Um, as you age.
But that was even besides the point, Governor,
right.
because when he picked Kamala Harris as vice president, he did that back in 2020 when they were having all the Black Lives Matter thing. That was to placate the far left, the Black Lives Matter crowd. I've read books on this. He was very fond of Amy Klobuchar, Gretchen Whitmer. Whether we like these people or not, they are totally different than Kamala Harris was, who was very inept as vice president and even in the Senate. So he
won,
was pushed.
But Biden got the nomination. The Democrats, the Democrats didn't want Bernie Sanders,
right?
So they all had to rally around someone.
And he was going to clinch that nomination, if not for South Carolina, if not for Jim Clyburn. And he was probably going to win that nomination, no contest after that.
Right. After Clyburn turned around South Carolina for Joe Biden, that's how he got the nomination. But then to me, Kamala Harris was not all that popular with the Democrats. She did very poorly when she was running.
Didn't win any state. She didn't make it to Iowa. She was at 1%.
Yeah, Klobuchar, you mentioned Klobuchar. She would have been a better choice. Ginny Raimondo,
from Rhode Island.
Choice. If they wanted to get a woman,
but she's very much against the unions. That would have been a big clash.
Who's with against the Democrat Party?
There's Gina Raimondo.
Oh, she is good for her. Another reason she would have been great.
Well, I'm just saying she would have had a huge clash with the Democrat Party. Obviously, them being very fond of unions, but although Trump won the Teamsters,
the rank and file of unions. The union bosses are, part of the Democratic Party. The rank and file union workers, though, a lot of them will think for themselves, and there'll be issues, say whether it's the natural right of self-defense, the Second Amendment, gun rights. There could be some social issues they care about. They care about the price of gasoline. When Biden, the first day in office, knocks out the Keystone XL pipeline, bringing crude oil from Alberta, Canada to the U.S. I can't believe it, but the pipe fitters union, I mean, these are 10,000 jobs, not just for the pipe fitters unions, but 10,000 jobs. But a lot of them for the pipe fitters union actually agrees with Joe Biden. And I'm just thinking, what a disconnect from your responsibility as the leader of the pipe fitters union, that you're agreeing with someone canceling a pipeline.
And they used to call him Union Joe. I do want to pull a George W. Bush here and shoot from the hip, as the president used to say, and push back with this at you and get your opinion on this, Governor. With the tariffs and the 10% tariffs and what with, obviously it's on a pause with Mexico and Canada right now.
Thank goodness.
With the oil that you just stated with Keystone, and the oil that we are getting from that area out of Alberta, Canada, and beyond in Canada. Are you worried about these tariffs if they do go back into place with President Trump?
Yeah, of all the tariffs that make the least sense of all, Rob, thanks for picking that up. Good antenna. It made absolutely no sense to me that on one hand, President Trump's asking the Saudis and OPEC to increase oil production, and then for our good allies, the Canadians, to say, all right, we're going to put a tariff. Originally, it was 25%. Then I think President Trump and his advisors started hearing from people in refineries in the Midwest and so forth. Gosh, you put a 10%, 25% tariff on this crude oil coming out of Canada that gets refined generally in the middle of the country. This is going to increase oil prices and gasoline prices. And this is one of the things you're promising to reduce. So to me, and there's already a discount for Canadian oil anyway, because they don't have a pipeline. They have to use rail or trucks, mostly rail, to get it. And it's not as efficient as a pipeline. So that was just shooting ourselves in the foot. And I'm glad that, it all came to a resolution. And one of the successes of the first Trump administration was the reforming of NAFTA into the USMCA. And you would want to have our North American continent. We're competing with China. We're competing with the rest of the world. But if you get the best out of Canada, and they have a lot of important, not just oil, and their oil is maybe a quarter of part of our economy. It may be more, maybe less, but roughly about a quarter of our gasoline and diesel petroleum products come out of Canada. And that's good. I don't mind getting it from Mexico. You prefer getting it from Louisiana and North Dakota and Texas and New Mexico and West Virginia, Pennsylvania. You prefer U.S. oil, but we do bring some in. We have the advantage of really great refineries that can refine some of these. It's called heavy crude. I don't want to get into too much detail of heavy crude versus light sweet and all the rest. But the point is, energy is the lifeblood of our economy. And so these supply chains of working together with Canada as well as Mexico can be helpful. Now, if China is sneaking in parts and so forth into Mexico, making it look like these are made in Mexico products, sure, you want to crack down on that. And you want to secure the border. There's no question about it. You want to secure the border, stop the fentanyl coming into our country. We also need a good education, information approach for people to be aware of the dangers of fentanyl, not just the children, but parents and schools and all the rest. And that's an important aspect that ought to be noticed, as well as trying to interdict it coming in. But the dangers of it and the horrific number of deaths of young people in this country by fentanyl is worse than anything else. We've lost more people from fentanyl than the entire casualties of the Vietnam War for Americans. So those are all important issues, but to just put 25% tariffs on, we're going to, tariffs are a roundabout tax. And ultimately, that's going to increase the cost of the inputs of products being sold, and unfortunately, that's inflationary. The tariffs are inflationary. Now, the president will say, "Well, we want to cut taxes. That's great. They want to cut spending through Doge. That's great. They want to make the Trump tax cuts on investment and work and all that permanent. They are for this." Drill baby drill and stopping the as he called it, the green new scam. That's great, and stop this idiocy of offshore wind turbines. Who in the heck would want to pay?
Well, they talk about how they care about the environment. Meanwhile, it's killing all these whales that, they're beaching in Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York. This was never happening before. It's all over the place. It's really destructive to the environment, and these people are so-called environments. It's just
yeah. And in Virginia, they're putting them off Virginia, and they just said it's going to cost $1 billion more. So now it's $11 billion. It's adding $500 a year to people's power bills. And who wants to pay $500 more a year that you don't have to on your power bills for a whale killing machine?
Whales, birds, they're killing, and the things look horrendous. It's just a joke in the middle of the ocean. It's really disgusting. Governor, I want to go deeper into this because you brought up some issues about China and also Canada. Let's keep going into foreign relations. We got a question from the audience about this, about Africa and the continent of Africa. And there's been some articles written about the continent. In 2060. They're going to have, they already have a lot of population, obviously, but they're going to have the youngest population in the world. And obviously, we all know the natural resources all over the countries in Africa. And China has already really, really dug deep in Africa. In many countries, they've builded roads and buildings and really put some significant infrastructure in these countries. We haven't really done as much as China. Are you worried, as I am, about these things, these guys, China getting so involved in Africa, and a lot of the things that we use, these semiconductors coming out of Africa, a lot of natural resources coming out of Africa, and they're going to get to it before we do because we've been late to the game due to administrations throughout. It hasn't just been Biden; it's been down the line.
Yeah, all good points. Part of the aspects of these that sometimes they're called rare earth minerals or critical minerals. Canada actually has a lot of them, including uranium, because if we do go from natural gas, which is fine for electricity, or coal, but if you want emissions-free, reliable baseload electricity, it's got to be nuclear. But China is Canada is a very good source of uranium from an ally rather than buying uranium from Russia. Now, what the Chinese have done in a lot of these countries in Africa, they've done it, and they've tried to do it in Latin America as well, South America and Central America, is these countries that have these valuable resources. They end up making loans, and they tell the government, we'll build these roads, we'll get this if you give us a concession on your cobalt or whatever it may be that they have there. And then those countries end up being beholden to China. And so the United States does need to be involved. And they talk about soft power is the term that's used. And now there's a big fuss over this USAID or USAID. And they've made some really obviously foolish decisions. Some of the things that have been brought up this is idiocy beyond being ridiculous. It's detestable, some of the stuff they've done. But the U.S. does need to be involved in those countries. And in some cases, it could be energy products. And our healthcare is helpful to people in those countries. If it weren't for the United States, AIDS would have killed off millions of people in Africa. And it is, I suppose you could say the ages are younger, their lifespans are not as long, generally speaking, in Africa either. But the Chinese have a plan called the Belt and Road approach, and they want to get whatever they can to enrich their country, their manufacturing, and they'll go anywhere, and they'll be brutal about it. They'll come in sweet with money, and then get these governments again tied to them, indebted to them, and then under their thumb. And so the United States does need to be involved everywhere in the world.
Well, Governor,
And for those, and this is the worry I have with the Republicans, it's just for some, but there's an isolation. It's called neo-isolationists. And they'll say, "Oh, you're the global this, global that." Well,
right.
If the United States withdraws from the rest of the world, who's going to be the leader? There's two superpowers in the world right now. It's the United States
China.
and the People's Republic of Communist China. And we need to support Taiwan. We need to support South Korea and Japan and so forth. But if the United States withdraws, China, this is just to China's advantage because they want to be dominant, not just in Asia, but around the world. And the fact that you bring up, or your questioner did, Africa, yeah, they have a major presence in Africa. And I don't,
Governor, I don't hear many people speaking about this, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this point, but I believe that the last president that actually invested a lot into Africa was President Bush with the AIDS issue, that he was always really made that huge priority throughout his presidency.
Right. And it was a therapeutic developed here in the United States. A fellow named Frank Gupton, no less, a friend of mine who lives in Virginia Beach. He was at any rate, he's now a professor at VCU, and it's just a great guy. And at any rate, he developed the less expensive way of manufacturing these therapeutics. There is not a vaccine as such for AIDS. There's only a therapeutic.
Let's move on. And again, for people listening, former governor and U.S. Senator George Allen here on the program. As we continue on into the conversation, and I apologize for people listening and watch this. I went off into different areas of the conversation, but we had to get some of those in. And I think that question on Africa needs to be spoken about more because, again, they are going to be the youngest population very soon. And we are, we should be looking at them in general because,
Well, generally speaking, what you want is countries that share our values,
yeah.
uh, as opposed to autocratic regimes. It's a better world.
But are you seeing anybody that's a politician right now in Washington even speaking about this Africa issue? Because
No,
this
not
is a big
really.
issue.
Yeah.
It's truly sad because, with that kind of landmass, we should be really in there. And China's already in there. It seems like China's been ahead of the game for the
Yeah.
majority of.
By the way, everyone's paying it, and I think Marco Rubio was an outstanding
Yeah,
choice.
he's phenomenal.
And he understands this. And in fact, the whole thing on the Panama Canal right now, this
Okay.
Hutchison Whampoa, which is a formerly Hong Kong, now, Hong Kong's now China, uh, controlling the cranes in the operation of the Panama Canal on both ends, on the Atlantic and Pacific side. That's an example of China's reach and their tentacles into so many different places around the world.
Yeah, and it's truly serious. We got to get our act together. Again, I want to go into this, just kind of drifting back into the election of 2024.
Sure.
We saw that President Trump brought a lot of Republicans into power, obviously winning the House and the U.S. Senate again, just like he did back in 2017, coming into power with that U.S. House and U.S. Senate in Republican hands. Governor, I want to talk about Virginia specifically, that Joe Biden won it by 10 points. It was very close in Virginia this time. Obviously, Virginia used to be a swing state. Obviously, then Barack Obama won it twice, and then it's continued on Democratic with Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton. But Hillary Clinton didn't win it by much either. So can we talk about election 2024 in Virginia?
Sure.
Obviously, Glenn Youngkin with that big win a couple years back, but it seems like it's trending red again.
All right. Several things. Biden won in 2020, Virginia by 10%. This time it was closer, it was around a little under 6%, which was about the same as it was in 2016 in Virginia, with Hillary Clinton winning by 5%. You have to have the right kind of candidate to win in Virginia as a Republican. This is stunning, and I keep these notes here for yours because I've given these speeches. Is that Virginia? If you look at the way Virginia voted in this election, and it's a trend for the last several years because of the very liberal votes of Northern Virginia, the government college towns, and inner cities, that Virginia votes about the same, within a percentage of New Jersey, of Minnesota, of actually Trump got more of a higher percentage slightly in Minnesota than he did in Virginia. Virginia votes about the same as Maine and New Mexico. And so that's the way Virginia is voting these days. New Hampshire is about 2% more conservative than Virginia in the way they vote. And that's why Kelly Ayotte won the governor's race there. When Governor Youngkin won, he won by a perfect campaign, tons of money, a lot of it he could fund it himself to offset Terry McAuliffe, who's a great fundraiser and well-known. Glenn Youngkin, again, could fund it. He ran a great campaign, great technical aspects, getting the vote out in rural areas to offset Northern Virginia and the cities and the government college towns. But plus you had a generally a good political wind going for Republicans. Even the New Jersey's governor's race ended up being closer than people would think. And then Terry McAuliffe making the comment that parents don't matter in the education of their children, with all the stuff that was going on with the trans guy going into the Loudoun County girls' bathroom and assaulting the girl.
Yeah,
and all that. Loudoun County's in Northern Virginia, so it got DC media, which means national media. So you had all that going for Governor Youngkin, an excellent candidate, excellent campaign, excellent issues. He won by 1.8% of the vote. So that's how perfect a game you need to run in Virginia to win. Now, in Virginia, I'm talking to you from Virginia Beach, where I live. And we had a battleground congressional race here, Jen Kiggins. And it's always one of the top 5, top 10 battlegrounds. It's a district that swings back and forth. Jen Kiggins ran about 4 or 5% higher than Trump did. The Democrats even threw in a fake candidate who looked like he's far right. And the Democrats have done this for nominations and so forth. But this guy drew over 2% of the vote, but Jen won Virginia Beach and Trump did not. And so Jen is a common sense conservative candidate. She's the type of candidate that can win in Virginia, as opposed to some of the other states. But President Trump, I think, was helped in this election in this area in particular, where there's a lot of military folks, and there were many who were upset with Biden uh, uh, dismissing people from the military because they wouldn't take a COVID vaccine shot, and people resented that, and so that's why I think Trump actually did a little better in this coastal Virginia area. I think because of the military and the economy and all the rest of the issues that everyone else cared about, the price of groceries, the price of gasoline, and so forth. But that particular aspect where there's so many military folks and military retirees here, they were upset with Biden. And then the other thing that I think mattered for the military community was that debacle of a withdrawal from Afghanistan. And I know that affected Biden's ratings all across the country, but again, it's amplified here in a military area where that what gosh, I'd heard so many people beyond griping about forcing the vaccines, and I also heard, I'm not going to say who I heard from, that some of them would get them, but they'd put salt water in the
Right.
it wasn't a real vaccine. But a lot of them would say they left all that equipment there. I mean,
Yeah.
these are rank and file people. They say, "Gosh, they left all those planes and all those armaments there. Gosh, get that stuff out first, or blow it all up if you can't
Right.
get it." And so, military folks really thought that Biden was inept as a commander in chief. And the one thing on Trump, they said, this guy's strong, he's got common sense, he's tough, he's no nonsense. So he still didn't win Virginia, but he did do much better than he did in 2020.
Did you find that strange with Biden having a son? Obviously, Bo was in the military and him being on the Foreign Relations Committee. Obviously, there's some mixed of his bag of. I know the Obama people thought that he was horrendous on foreign relations, but that's for another time, for another day. But regardless of that, do you feel like that was strange that he really did that huge debacle in Afghanistan with that much knowledge?
Yeah, well, it's what he was given, and he made that decision. And
Yeah,
and I think that people would make fun of Trump for watching the shows, for watching Fox and CNN
right.
and whatever. He's News Nation, I guess these days,
Sure.
News Fox. But Biden, when Biden finally made a statement in that August of 2021, I said, and he still thought it was a success. I said, he's not watching even CNN. If you watch CNN, they're even saying this is a disaster and this is embarrassing and what a fiasco this is. And I said, he all he knows is what they're feeding him. And they're just feeding him stuff that, oh yeah, you did great. You did great. You ought to get out there. And just the tone, in addition to the content of his speech, I said, he doesn't know what the rest of us are
Yeah.
seeing and feeling and understanding of this visual of what an embarrassing mess.
I just want to continue on with Virginia. I know I had that little side note there, but I had to ask you because obviously you worked with the man
Well,
for quite a
Virginia,
few
well,
years.
yeah, I understand. Virginia is it's tough. It's tough. You have to have the right candidate.
Well, we have Abigail Spanberger right
Yeah,
now. Is Bobby Scott running against her or he's
I
out?
don't. I don't. Well, he hasn't declared he's out, but the longer he waits, the less I think
Yeah.
he'll run in.
Well, they've
For
all surrounded around her anyway. Kaine's
most of
around
them,
her, all,
yeah.
all the Democrats in
Well,
Virginia. So he's
not all
pretty
the
clear.
Democrats. Some of there's one. Her name is Louise Lucas, African American woman, very powerful leader of the state senate, and Spanberger's trying to get the Black Caucus members of the
Oh,
Virginia legislature with her. In Virginia, neither Democrats or Republicans have a majority, and we don't register by party in Virginia. The Democrats have probably an advantage of 3 or 4%. Depends on the year. Could be higher. It could be 5%. The key are the independent, unaffiliated voters. And Republicans generally need to win about 54, 55% of the independent voters to win. So whoever wins the independent voters generally will win. The Democrats don't have. If the Democrats get to 49% of the independent voters, they'll win. Of course, turnout matters too. The world's controlled by those who show
sure.
up, and in a campaign and a candidate need to motivate their supporters and also persuade more of the independents, the non-affiliated, so to speak, folks to say that their ideas on the economy, on energy, on education, on safe communities make more sense to them than the other side.
But Lieutenant Governor Sears is running, obviously, as a Republican. Glenn Youngkin, obviously, behind her. It's Spanberger is former CIA agent. She's not as woke as the rest of the Democrats are. Do you feel like this is a pretty formidable challenge, for, Lieutenant Governor Sears? Because it's going to be a tough race because she's not running against some woke person.
Right. It will. It's going to be, I think it's going to be a tight race. There have been a lot of polls done. Some of them are outliers. But I think generally speaking, it's within the margin of error.
Sure.
Issues that I think that'll come up in Virginia going forward are going to be right to work law. We're the furthest state north on the eastern seaboard with a right to work law. This is a worker freedom issue that men and women working are not compelled to pay union dues as a condition of working. I know as governor who spent more time on economic development and recruiting business than any other issue. First line out of my mouth to some company, whether they're up north, the Midwest, wherever they are, said Virginia's the furthest state north on the eastern seaboard with a right to work law. And that matters. If you don't have a right to work law, you're not even on the field of competition to lose. And we would just become the southernmost northeastern state without it. Abigail Spanberger, as a member of Congress, voted against Virginia's right to work law. Winsome Sears is for it. So business folks who understand the importance of our right to work law or worker freedom, that's going to be a significant issue. Another issue is going to be some of this Green New Deal scam with the EV mandates. What an insult. I'd love asking folks when I'm giving speeches, I'll even ask the wait staff, hey, who do you think ought to decide what kind of car you drive? You or the government? Everyone says, well, I think I should decide. I can't imagine people who think, gosh, I'd like some bureaucrat to tell us what kind of car we ought to drive. I'm not against EVs. Electric vehicles are fine as a choice, whether you want diesel or gasoline or compressed natural gas, batteries, corn from a jar, whatever. It's your decision in a free market of choices decided by free people. And so Spanberger's been wrong on that. The Democrats also come up with some really ludicrous ideas on public safety. They've introduced a bill in the legislature, and this is one of the fellows running for lieutenant governor, and it's to give a tax credit to employers who hire felons. And you're saying, what about, great, you want to give a tax credit for hiring a rapist? How about a tax credit for hiring a rape victim? I mean, this is just nonsense with it. And so the other thing that'll come up will be, and the Democrats are going to bring up the abortion issue. There's no question that's an important rallying point for them, and I think it's important for any candidate running to determine in their own heart and their own mind what they think is the appropriate role for government in this issue of abortion. And so that'll be an issue that'll have to, it's on the minds of many people. And the Democrats, in my view, are taking an extreme position. They don't even think that parents ought to be involved when their unwed minor daughter's going through the trauma of an abortion. Heck, you need parental consent to get an ear piercing. So this is, at least in Virginia. So, but those will be, I think, the salient issues will be right to work, energy policy, because Virginia's electricity bills are skyrocketing, and and things like these loony things that they come up with their criminal apologist views, and abortion.
You think the Republicans can take back the House and the Senate?
It's going to be close, Rob. I'd love to say, oh yeah, they'll do it, but I also like to be honest.
Is it tough because of turnout in an off-election year?
Yeah. Well, the turnout, whether the turnout is high, low, or in between, again, it'll be up to the candidates to try to get their folks out. We have here in Virginia Beach, which is an area that votes generally Republican. We have a Republican mayor got reelected. And most cities are Democrats, but Virginia Beach and Chesapeake, which is an adjacent city, have Republican governors. And there's going to be a guy named Tim Anderson, who was once a delegate. Redistricting knocked him out, and he's going to run. And that'll be a key state. I don't think either side's going to, there'll probably be about 5 House of Delegates races that are really pivotal. And I think how the top of the ticket does will have an impact on it. We're fortunately have a great attorney general in Jason Miyares, who has just been fantastic. And he's come up. We're talking about the EV mandates. Virginia by law, was linked to California's EV standards. What an insult! Why? I mean, it'd be bad enough if you make your own stupid decisions as a state, but why would you ever want to tether yourself to the stupid policies of another state, especially California? And so Jason came up with a brilliant opinion that allowed us, for Governor Youngkin, to extricate us from the California EV mandates. Meanwhile, they tried to get out of what is called the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. This was an added 4% tax on power bills to give tax Virginians, to give it to this idiocy that has no effect on the weather, just increases people's power bills. And so Youngkin and Attorney General Miyares figured a way to get us out, because the Democrats wanted to keep us stuck with these northeastern states, not New Hampshire. Live free or die. New Hampshire's not in it. And I think Pennsylvania's generally not gotten into it. But these northeastern states, for the most part, are losing population because of the high cost of living, their high taxes, high regulations. And so why the heck would you want to be taxing Virginians into this scheme? But these are the kind of issues that'll come up. And fortunately, Jason Miyares has just been excellent as an attorney general, and he'll be running again as attorney general.
I could see him as a rising star. I knew you're close with him, and running for governor sometime within the next few years. I think he's a rising star in Virginia, as you do as well. Governor, let's move on with the last few questions on the incoming Trump administration, the EOs, the cabinet picks. Let's start with the EOs first before we get into the cabinet. So obviously there's been quite a few EOs on DEI, on also the trans craziness that's went on the past few years. The men and women sports just came out. They had an EO on that to make sure that we keep men out of women's sports. What is your take on the EOs? Obviously, they're good. They're law, but they're not, another Democrat comes in. I'm sorry. They're not law. The Democrat comes in, they just wipe the floor with all this stuff. So could some of these EOs go into the reconciliation packages, whether they're one bill or two bills? I know they're putting that together. Mike Johnson and also John Thune are working on that stuff now. Are you seeing those being put into the reconciliation, or are they just going to be EOs and maybe they turn law, maybe they don't eventually?
So, some could. I think the cost-saving ideas could be. I mean, the reconciliation, I really hate to bore your listeners and viewers on process, but it's really the budget, and the reconciliation is getting it into the budget. And so the cost-saving ideas and the policies behind those cost-saving ideas reduction in the full-time employees and so forth. Yes, some of that can be done. The energy policies, that you can predicate your revenues on energy policies, not just, gosh, what's the price of gasoline, but what Governor, now Secretary Burgum, can do as Secretary of the Interior. There are a lot of federal lands and waters, the permitting through EPA and so forth, to stop this pause of the
Drilling.
well, not just the drilling, but the export of liquefied natural gas, which really matters to Europe, our European allies, so they're not captive customers of Russia's natural gas. And so a lot of these energy, the so-called severance taxes or royalties that the United States government receives, you can literally raise trillions of dollars without raising taxes just from the royalties of severance taxes from our oil and gas extraction, coal as well, but they're focusing mostly on oil and gas. And so all of that fits into a budget. And obviously the key thing to get the several things to get into this budget is the drill baby drill as aspects of it, the spending aspects that are executive orders, and extending the 2017 Trump tax cuts. Now, and how they scored in all this matters. My view is extend the 2017 tax cuts. Those lower taxes on small businesses, manufacturers, and everyone. The result of that was increased investment in the United States, increased wages, increased capital investment, and also greater productivity in so many ways. And the government got more revenues in from it. So I know the high tax states, California and the New York and all of them, they're caring about this SALT deduction, limiting the state and local tax deduction to $10,000. And so my view is, why should the rest of the country subsidize high tax cities?
Right. But just to push back, Governor, though, we have to be careful because we have Republicans running in 2 years for reelection in New Jersey, in New York, and that's what's needed to keep the House majority. So
I understand all of that. But that cannot hold up what's good for the rest of the country. Understand. And I actually, to some extent, I can understand the Republicans, but when you have these Democrats from New York and New Jersey carrying on about these, the SALT deduction helps wealthy people out, and the Democrats thrive on this class warfare that the Republicans are party of the millionaires and billionaires and the Wall Street folks, this, that, and the other. Those are the folks that are getting hit here, that are not being able to deduct as much for their expensive homes and income that they have in these high tax states. So for the Democrats to say they care about the working people and the Republicans are for the wealthy elites, it's the more wealthy people who benefit or are harmed by eliminating the SALT deductions. But my view is they ought to put in the energy policies, extend the 2017 tax policies and all the good things of it about expensing and all of that, and then come back later. And then you could maybe look at the SALT. Maybe they can work something out in the SALT, and maybe they double it, or whatever. That's something get negotiated. I do think that President Trump somehow, some way, should get the idea of not taxing tips in there. That's something that resonated with a lot of.
He just went to Las Vegas in the casino and started pushing that again. So he's going to have to do it. And I don't know if a lot of people are going to be in favor of that. But I know the people will be, but
he got voted. He got elected. If you run a campaign, and I did this as governor, you run a campaign on ideas and initiatives, you get elected. That's the will of the people. The people are the owners of the government. And so anybody who votes against removing the tax on tips, make them vote on it. And then every time you go into a restaurant or a bar or whatever and say, hey, so-and-so thought your tips ought to be taxed. I think you ought to be able to keep that.
Governor, let me ask you this. First question first. Do you do two bills or one bill?
I think it's better to do one bill. I think it's
Okay.
difficult to do two bills. Everyone wants to move quickly. It's better to get it done right once
So
than,
shove everything in one bill. Okay.
yeah, try to. It's yeah, they don't have much of a majority
Yeah.
in the House, that's for certain. But I think Doge can be very helpful to them. I would hope that Doge, by the way, in all their removing of unnecessary regulations and excessive spending and waste and abuse and all of that, if they want to have a long-term effect on the government, they ought to come out in favor of a balanced budget amendment to the federal constitution so that members of Congress and the president,
Mhm.
they can't say yes to every spending request. They need to scrutinize it. You need to prioritize. And even if you have defense, as a obviously national defense and military is a paramount responsibility of the federal government, while education and law enforcement are prerogatives mostly for the states.
Mm.
The way you raise revenues with a vibrant economy, with people working, businesses prospering, and paying taxes. But you just can't say yes to everything. And you got to look at ways to innovate and improve and become more efficient in your operations. And that's every 49 states have a balanced budget requirement in their constitution. And that's why the high spending states have high taxes, because they spend a lot, but they have to pay taxes to pay for it. You could say, gosh, it's awful what they're doing in California or New York or whatever. They're spending money on a bunch of frivolous things. Well, they still do have a balanced budget. And so the
Yeah.
taxpayers, the people have to pay for those services that they're getting from the federal government, that a place like Texas or Tennessee or Florida would say, why in the heck we would not want to pay for that kind of stuff. Let people or the private sector handle it.
I want to end on some nominees here, the four controversial ones. So obviously you're from Virginia, big defense hub, obviously. With that said, let's go to Pete Hegseth. We just talked about President Trump winning popular vote, winning the Electoral College, winning all 7 swing states. A lot of Republicans gave him a lot of crap for Pete Hegseth. He did, get through. It was a 50-50, but obviously the 3 Republicans voted against Pete Hegseth as the nominee. With that said, being in Virginia with that defense hub, what's your take on Pete? You like him? You don't? He's middle of the road? What?
He might not have been my first choice.
I figured that.
At least he wasn't Matt Gaetz, who was the
Yeah.
most.
Matt Gaetz might run for governor of Florida, so we might have to deal with that down here. We'll see what
I
happens.
can't imagine people. Well, people of Florida can vote for who they want, but I think DeSantis has done an excellent job as governor. I think Byron Donald.
Byron Donalds is going to probably run as well. Yeah.
So and by the way, Pam Bondi should have been the first pick right off the bat for Attorney General.
She's a fire plug. Yeah.
Oh, she's great. She's smart. She's experienced. Hegseth, just again, this is anecdotal. The folks who like Hegseth are kind of and these are retiree military folks I mentioned earlier. There's a lot of retired veterans around here. They actually like that he's not one of the higher ups. And I think what President Trump and I think having been governor, I think there should be deference, or there's a presumption that the governor or president ought to be able to choose the assistant coaches that he wants on his team. And so whether you think they're the best person or not, he won, and I think he ought to be accorded that, unless the candidate is just truly awfully detrimental, that you give that benefit of the doubt to him. I think President Trump wanted, with a lot of the picks he made, these are folks who present well on TV. They accord themselves, or they express their views in a way that they're comfortable on TV. And I think that's same with Kristi Noem and Hegseth and the Secretary of Transportation,
Duffy. Yeah.
Duffy. Sean, he was on Fox News. In
Right.
fact,
And
there
his
was,
wife is on Fox as well.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so, these are folks that are comfortable with the media. And President Trump, with his show The Apprentice, he
Right.
understands promotion, and Hegseth meets that criteria for him. And he got through. He got through
Yeah.
even some of the hearing stuff that came up. But he did, these hearings matter a lot. You can get all this whining and allegations and so forth.
Right.
But he acquitted himself, I should say, very well in that hearing. And I think that's what got him to at least a tie vote.
Kash Patel, FBI. Obviously, you were in the Senate. You would have been in these deliberations if you were
Yeah.
still in there. With that stated, what is your take? Obviously, there's a lot of the January 6th stuff coming out. He's done a
But
lot of
see, yeah,
podcasts,
yeah.
bombastic guy.
Yeah, the January 6th, this is, I'm saying that President Trump has a 90% batting average, which
Right.
is really good. So I try to emphasize the positive. I'll
Sure.
be straightforward with you. I think I disagree with the pardoning of those on January 6th who assaulted police officers or destroyed property. It's a different thing as far as commuting the sentences or pardoning those who just were sauntering around after. But anyone who was breaking those windows and doors and assaulting police officers, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You may say, gosh, the sentence is too long and I'm going to commute that. But to pardon them, to me, that's wrong. I wouldn't have done something like that. But the president has the right to do so. Now you got a bunch of people wondering if presidents should have pardon powers. But I disagreed with
Well,
that.
but just to be fair, whatever we think about January 6th, we think about January 6th. But the Biden pardons on his way
Oh
out,
yeah, I
pardoning his whole
understand. Yeah,
family
but
at
yeah.
11:45 before 12 when a new president comes in was pretty despicable, just to
I
say the
agree. Rob agreed. I like to not have situational principles or situational ethics. I think they're both wrong. I think what Biden did was wrong. I don't like to say, well, God, he did this, but what about them?
sure.
I understand that. That is an argument. It is not persuasive to me. I think what Biden did was wrong and egregious, and more than just his family. Some of these other people, cop killers and others that he was commuting
Yes.
sentences. I mean, what he did was worse than Trump's, but they both were wrong as far
Correct.
as those who committed. Fine. I'm on the side of law enforcement, and I'm not going to say that,
I
oh,
was
God.
told even some of the January 6th people that Biden pardoned, they didn't take the pardon, but he did fight, give that pardon to Anthony Fauci. Anthony Fauci took the pardon. It's very suspect because when your family or Anthony Fauci or whoever may takes that pardon, it's almost like you're agreeing to having done something wrong.
Right, right. I saw Adam Kinzinger saying, gosh, I don't want to take this pardon. It means
Right.
that I've done something wrong implicitly with it. But I think that Biden exceeded good judgment, but that's not the only time he's done
Just
it.
to go back to the
But
question
again,
on
but
Kash Patel.
but Patel again, if Patel, to me, he's one that's going through the hearings.
He's probably going to get through, to be
Oh,
fair.
I think Patel will get through. And it seems like who's the other one you're talking about? Oh,
We talked about Hegseth and Patel. Well, we're talking about
Gabbard.
guys that are very bombastic, pretty
Yeah,
much.
well, we'll see what happens with him. Again, I think that the Republicans are going to see that Trump won their state, he won, and he's accorded this presumption. The same with RFK. RFK, if the Democrats nominated RFK, the Republicans be against him. RFK, for a lot of Republicans, is saved because he was against the vaccine mandates.
Right.
So for a lot, if he weren't against the vaccine mandates, I don't think he.
But isn't it funny? People like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren that say that they're for God's gift to the world, and they've been, saying that in their presidential campaigns back in 2020 about they care about people. But that's all they were talking about throughout the RFK Jr. hearings was about vaccine this, vaccine that. The guy is saying, he said it about 1,000,000 times, he's not against vaccines. He wants to look at the research. He wants to get nonpartisan people to look at the research, not doctors that are getting paid off by the FDA, the CDC, and the HHS. That's it. And just have unbiased information. And then you find out that Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders were the top two getters of money from Pfizer and these other pharmaceutical companies in 2020 as a presidential election. So it's very suspect when you're saying these things and you're pushing the company narrative and this person's coming in trying to shake things up like RFK Jr. is.
Yeah, but he's got some kooky stuff.
Right.
That
Well,
he's been
yeah, I
involved
mean,
in.
to be fair, there's a lot of kooky things I'm sure you know in Washington. I'm sure if we opened everybody else's closets, that's a senator,
Sure.
congressman in
Yeah.
Washington,
But
there'd be
again,
some real characters.
Understood. I just think that if RFK were being nominated by a Democrat president, Republicans would be up in arms
Right.
over it.
But the Democrats loved him when he was saying that George Bush cheated in Ohio in 2004
Sure.
against
And
John Kerry, and when he was an environmentalist cleaning
Right.
up the water in New York
Right.
City. But now they hate him because Donald Trump is Satan and he's the Antichrist and this and that.
Right.
He's a racist.
Right,
And
right. That's what I'm saying. His climate cult stuff, his positions on abortion, all of that. But
Right.
would have Republicans, and in fact, there are Republicans, former Vice President Pence and all those
Right.
against him. But what helps him with Republicans is not generally the conspiracy views on vaccines, but that he was in this COVID vaccine and all these lockdowns and the shuttering of businesses and especially of schools, that this country, young people in this country, have not caught back up to where they were
Right.
before in math and reading. And so there's a lot of folks that's still upset with that. We started off with the vaccine mandates for the military folks, but the fact that RFK Jr. was publicly against what the government was doing and taking a kind of a libertarian point of view on that, that's what gives him, I think, the support of a lot of Republicans, that he stood up. He wasn't one of those who timidly acquiesced to whatever Fauci or the government told him to do, or these various governors forced states and people and college students and all the rest to do. That's, I think, what gave him his credentials or support from a lot of the rank and file Republican base.
Look at this. I've interviewed a lot of people. I've talked to a lot of people that are conservative. They love RFK Jr. on health. They want, and these people are to the right. I mean, they're the rightest people. These people are, some of them are farther right than Trump, and they love RFK Jr. And it is, and we can kind of end on RFK Jr. on this. It's all about making America, looking at the food. Half of the country is fat and obese. They don't have the presidential physical fitness test anymore in the high schools and the grammar
Terrible. My father was chairman of the President's Council on Physical Fitness and Sports under Ronald Reagan. You're right. People are too sedentary. Joke. Yeah. So all of that's good. Make America healthy again. That's all fine. Let me tell you, one of the cabinet secretaries that's gotten no attention, but is one that I'm watching, and I got to make sure I say her name correctly, Lori Chavez DeRemer.
The labor secretary.
Yeah,
yes.
From Oregon.
What's your take on her?
Yeah. Well, I want to see her answers in the committees on right to work. She voted for the so-called PRO Act, which would knock out Virginia's
under Biden.
Yeah. And so, and I've seen that Rand Paul is paying attention to her.
Yeah.
And this is one. This for me, this is an example of someone. If I were not convinced or persuaded that she is not going to push that, and she'll be subservient, so to speak, to President Trump's views, and that was her position as a member of Congress. I want the members in the Senate committee to deuce that testimony out of her, that, yes, I voted that way. That's not going to be the policy of the Trump administration. We're not going to do anything against right to work laws. But if she did not convincingly make such a statement in a testimony, she'd be the type of nominee I'd vote against, even
Yeah.
if the president. So the other ones, again, you when in doubt, if you're saying, oh gosh, I
Well, I
picked,
wanted to ask you about Tulsi Gabbard and her
well, she's
stance
another
on
one. Yeah,
Edward Snowden and the government
wrong.
files that he released. Yeah, go ahead.
I think her positions on Snowden, although I think she's kind of walking him back one way
He
or
is
the
walking it back, right?
but Snowden was a traitor. He endangered those who are serving in our armed forces and those undercover and all the rest. You can disagree with policies. You don't give this information to the communist Chinese and the Russians. So Snowden to me is a traitor and should be prosecuted.
So, but again, this goes back to RFK Jr. on abortion that he said during his
Right.
confirmation, I'm going to follow the Trump administration. I'm keeping my opinions out of this. She's saying she's disavowing Snowden. Again, if these people are giving you these, they're disavowing abortion, disavowing Snowden, and they're giving you these guarantees that they're not going to run the agency like they're going to run it like President Trump wants to run it, not like they
Correct.
want to run it. Do
Exactly,
you
Rob.
vote for those people, though?
Yeah, because I would give deference to the prerogatives of the executive to assemble
Okay.
a team that they won't. In fact, the other thing on RFK with this, he'd otherwise be one of these saps for the Green New Deal and the climate apocalypse cult.
Yeah, he said some
But
stuff.
even
Yeah.
but even during the campaign where President Trump would have him on the stage, I'm going to listen to him on health, and he knows he's not going to have anything to do with energy policy and
Right, right.
so forth. So that's walled off. He can think whatever he wants, but Trump's not going to have him getting involved in
Well,
those.
Governor, President Trump, if any president, if he doesn't like what you're going to say or what you're doing, he's going to fire your ass on the spot. So listen, if you stop meddling in things that he doesn't want you to meddle in, you're out. That's the game, set, match. It's over.
No, I think on Kennedy, it's even more so because Trump would bring that up at some of his rallies when he'd have Kennedy says,
Right.
"Yeah, I like his health. We got to get our country healthy." Giving the stats like you did on obesity and so forth. But he would also have a proviso, just so people knew. Yes, his view on energy. No, we're not going to have him getting involved in that. And again, and then on the abortion issue, he has said, following President Trump's policies, that he wants on that subject.
And just to kind of give the last word on this, Governor. So Todd Young, the senator from Indiana, also he's asked for this letter from Tulsi Gabbard on what she wants to do. He wants these guarantees, as well as Cassidy, a senator from Louisiana. He wanted some guarantees from RFK Jr. on vaccine stuff and all this other rigmarole. Is that something that's usually done for a nominee? That you have to give the senator like written guarantees of you're not going to do this or you're going to do this? It sounds a little much, though, doesn't it?
I know Senator Cassidy, and I don't know Young well.
Yeah, he's
Cassidy,
a newer guy. Yeah.
yeah, but Cassidy's a very conscientious, principled
Well, he
leader.
was a medical doctor.
Right.
Or
And
still
so
is.
I see nothing wrong with them doing this. That the role, and it's an important part of the Constitution, that the Senate is to advise and consent and on nominees, appointments, and so forth. And so I think he's taking his job seriously. He wants assurances. It is much better to say that, well, here, I have this piece of paper right here that says,
But
you believe that men are men and men are not women. There's only two sexes, and men have no business in women's locker rooms and playing in women's sports. Well, you sign that. And they sign that. And you say, all right. And then you do something contrary. I have
But
your.
it's not a legal document, so
It's not
hypothetically,
a legal doc. You're right. It's not a legal
if you get
document.
confirmed, you could do whatever the hell you want, hypothetically, right?
Right, but most people like to keep their word, I would hope, if you're in public
Well,
service. And so I think,
you
for
would think.
example, we were talking about this DeRemer, if I'm pronouncing her name correctly, for labor
Sure.
secretary. I wouldn't mind saying, I'm not going to do anything to negate or rescind the right of the states to have right to work laws
Hmm.
as a labor secretary. I wouldn't mind having that. So you could, some of what you do, yeah, you could say it's not legally binding. You're not going to take them to court with a writ of mandamus that you shall follow what you wrote on this sheet of paper, but you a lot of times can embarrass people into doing the right thing. And you say you broke your word. To me, integrity is the most important aspect of leadership, no matter what you do in or out of government. And if you say something to someone and you don't keep your word, putting in writing makes sure that they can't say that, oh, they misunderstood what I was saying to them in our conversation in their office on February 5th. You got it in writing, and I think that's helpful and good for them for doing it. And I think it's part of their responsibility as senators.
I'm grateful for your time, Governor. Let's end with the Gaza issue. President Trump, President Trump went up there, and I don't know if he wants to create Mar-a-Lago over in Gaza, make it a vacation spot. I don't know how many people would want to go there on vacation, but that's besides the point. What's your take on the president, the talk about Gaza? Obviously, Bibi Netanyahu came over there, met with President Trump. Is Jared Kushner seems like he's out of the negotiations in this Trump administration, which he was during the Abraham Accords. I know his father is an ambassador, so he maybe is still involved in that aspect, the dad, but not Jared. So, talk about Gaza, what you think is going to happen with that. Obviously, I'm not going to ask you if there's peace in the Middle East because that's kind of a farce and
All right.
foolishness.
Well, first of all, I think it's great that Assad is out in Syria. I think it's great that Israel has knocked out Hezbollah and, as a practical matter, much of Hamas and has decimated the defenses of Iran. The Gaza. Let's see how this hostage release deal ceasefire goes forward. I think it's fanciful to think you're going to put a resort in Gaza and have the people who
I
live
think
there.
that's just a lot of razzle dazzle. That's
Well, I
just
know it's
Trump's
razzle
fault.
dazzle, but some people actually believe this to some extent. I was telling my wife Susan, I said, you know what? Now, where did he come up with this concept? Obviously, it's Mediterranean ocean seafront property. At one time, Lebanon, and they talked about Beirut being the Paris of the Middle East. And at one time, before they were wrecked by these and Hezbollah and others, Lebanon was once a very prosperous country.
Well, so was Libya.
Yeah, so was Libya. Well, but that's North Africa, Libya, Tunisia,
Sure.
Algeria, and so forth. But Lebanon's nearer
Right.
to Gaza with it, and so I think it's to me maybe it's razzle dazzle distraction with it. I think my worry is it will be a point of ridicule for the Democrats for a long time. And I think conservatives are wasting a lot of their time. I don't know if you get these things, but I get these pictures of McDonald's and Exxon gas stations and Hardee's or whatever, Arby's and so forth, all on a strip in Gaza. And so I'm just saying people are just wasting their time with this humor with it when the biggest serious concern in the Middle East is preventing, and I think President Trump knows this, and so certainly all the Israelis know it, is Iran cannot get a nuclear weapon.
Yeah.
That is what matters. The rest of this stuff is frivolous, banter.
Do you feel like that's why nuclear is so tough in this country? Obviously, maybe people are still talking about the Hiroshima and what went on with that. And also, I've been hearing a lot of issues that we're not pushing more toward nuclear in this country as far as a power source due to, if we get too many nuclear power plants, then China's got something to say about it. India's got something to say about it.
That's
Pakistan's
civilian
got some.
nuclear. There's a difference between weapons grade nuclear and civilian nuclear. Uh, and India, actually, when I was in the Senate, introduced a bill for the U.S. India civilian nuclear uh, agreement because they have poor air quality.
Yeah.
Quality of coal is a low grade coal. And their air, and they have literally hundreds of millions of people without any electricity. So it seemed to me nuclear could be a solution for them, and it needs to be part of the mix for the U.S. The U.S. hasn't had. There is a new nuclear power plant being commissioned, or I think up and running now in Georgia, near Savannah. The main thing we need to do with our nuclear facilities is relicense them, so long as they can continue operating safely.
Because nuclear is very safe compared to the way it used to be, correct?
Well, yes, it is, and there's a lot of precautions. The impediment for nuclear is number one, it's very costly. The capital cost of a nuclear power plant compared to a coal or natural gas facility is just exponentially higher. Secondly, it's siting it. Most people are fearful of a nuclear power plant near them because they remember Chernobyl, they remember Three Mile Island. Now, note 3 Mile Island, I forgot whether it's Amazon, Google, one of these big tech companies is actually wants to relicense it, put data centers there and utilize it. If you want to learn, and this is blasphemous, on how to do nuclear the best, you can learn from the French. The French get about 70% of their electricity from nuclear. Every one of their plants is exactly the same design. Our problem is that there's about 102 nuclear reactors in our country. And every one of those sites is storing high level nuclear waste, radioactive waste. And that's going to be radioactive for 1,400 years. The low level radioactive waste, the gloves, the gowns, the boots and all that, that goes to a repository. But we don't have a national repository. What the French do is they reprocess, they recycle the spent fuel and ultimately vitrify it, encase it in glass, and its half-life for radioactivity is about 140 years. So it's a much smarter way of doing things. Now, the next thing that's coming along in nuclear are called small modular reactors. And we already are using small modular reactors in our aircraft carriers and also on our nuclear submarines. And I asked a fella at Virginia Tech to extrapolate, if you hooked up the nuclear reactor on the USS Ronald Reagan, how many houses could that power? And he extrapolated it, and it would be about 33,000 houses, residences, not businesses, but residences, which is the size of the city of Portsmouth in Virginia. Sure. And so if you get a bank of those, of say 10 or a dozen of them, those are ways of it. Again, if you want emissions-free electricity, the really other obviously there's some places geothermal works or hydroelectric, but that's a factor of geology and terrain. But you could have these small modular reactors that people seem to somehow, at least initially, be more comfortable with than big nuclear power plants. And the smaller reactors, it's still in the developmental stage. But I think that with President Trump and their secretaries of energy and secretary of the interior, I think that they're move quickly on it. And I think that'll be part of the future, as well as natural gas as reliable baseload electricity generation, rather than the intermittent sources of this, wind power. Solar photovoltaics, I think, have a place supplementally, but you're not going to run your whole economy on something that only works 20% of the time.
Former governor and U.S. Senator George Allen, thanks so much for your time. It's always a pleasure to have you on, and go to that Tennessee game next year. I hope you're going to a few games. Josh Heupel leading the crowd over there. I
Yeah,
know my Gators gave them a good run for their money
yeah,
this year.
they had to beat them in overtime, and
Yeah,
we were we had a great time at the third Saturday in October game where they beat Alabama, and
yeah.
so that was
Well,
fun.
Alabama is not like they used to do. I think the NIL's caught up to them a little bit, as
Yeah,
well as Georgia too. I think the college football is kind of up for grabs now. Which any,
your
which
Gators are better. Your Gators
Yeah,
are.
well, got a good quarterback, thank God. The coach was under fire this year, but
Yeah,
he ended the year pretty well, 8-5, and he was lucky. Otherwise, he would have been out. But yeah, I think
and
the NIL needs some rules. The transfer portal needs
yeah,
some rules because
that'll be a whole nother segment.
yeah, it's another story for another day. But Governor, thanks so much for always coming on here and talking. We really appreciate you.
Great being with you, Rob, and all your viewers and listeners. Adios.